The dust devils danced like phantoms on the horizon, mocking the stillness of the dawn. Inside the canvas-covered wagon, a different kind of stillness held sway, one born of exhaustion and desperation. Silas felt it the moment he swung himself up, the unnatural weight, the faint scent of something metallic underlying the dry straw. He pulled back the edge of a rough blanket thrown haphazardly over a mound and froze. It wasn't sacks of feed or spare canvas. It was a woman, curled impossibly tight against the far wall, her face bruised and swollen on one side, a cut splitting her lower lip. Her hair, the color of dried wheat, was tangled with straw. And nestled close to her, tiny bundles swaddled in worn cloth, 3 small heads visible, breathing shallowly. Infants. Triplets, by the look of it. They couldn't be more than a few months old. Silas stood for a long moment, the cold morning air biting at his skin, the vast, indifferent land stretching out around him. He was a man alone by choice, accustomed to the solitude of the trail, the predictable needs of his horses and himself. This was a complication of an unimaginable scale. A woman, clearly in distress, likely on the run, bearing the marks of violence, and 3 utterly helpless lives. His mind, trained by years of hardship to assess and react, catalogued the signs. The careful way she was curled, protecting the babies, the almost skeletal thinness beneath the fabric of her simple dress, the shallow rise and fall of her chest, the breathing ragged. Fear, exhaustion, and pain, deep and physical, emanated from her like heat from a furnace. He stepped down from the wagon, his movements deliberate to avoid disturbing the fragile peace of their sleep. He walked a few paces away, scanned the empty land in every direction. Nothing but the wind worrying the grass and the endless sky. Whoever had done this to her, whoever she was running from, wasn't immediately visible. But they were out there somewhere. That much was certain. A woman didn't end up beaten and hiding in a stranger's wagon with 3 babies without serious cause. He rubbed a hand over his jaw, the stubble rough against his skin. The instinct was to cut his losses, to leave before whatever storm she was fleeing caught up to him. But looking back at the silent wagon, the thought curdled in his gut. Those weren't sacks of flour. They were people, and they were broken. He returned to the wagon, moving with a quiet competence. He checked the horses, watered them from the limited supply he carried. He built a small, smokeless fire using dry twigs, enough to take the edge off the pervasive chill and heat some coffee. He rationed a little jerky, chewed it slowly, eyes constantly sweeping the horizon. He needed to move, and soon. Sitting still was inviting trouble. But moving with 3 infants and an injured woman presented its own set of problems. He glanced back at the wagon again. The smallest sound, a faint whimper, reached him. One of the babies. The woman stirred then, a low groan escaping her lips. The quiet grace period was over. The reality of his discovery, stark and demanding, was waking up. And Silas knew, with a certainty that settled cold and heavy in his chest, that his solitary journey had just taken an unforeseen, perilous turn. He poured a cup of coffee, black and strong, and waited. She woke slowly, pain a dull throb behind her eyes and along her ribs. For a moment, confusion clouded her mind. The rough floor, the smell of canvas and straw, not the familiar, fear-filled corner she had hidden in before fleeing. Then the memory slammed back, sharp and brutal. The blows, the frantic scramble in the dark, the desperate, silent prayer as she'd stumbled towards the distant lights of the small camp, seeing the shape of a wagon and nothing else, driven by a primal need to hide, to vanish, to protect the tiny lives pressed against her chest. She shifted, wincing, and felt them 3 small weights, breathing softly beside her. Relief, sharp and pure, pierced through the pain. They were safe, for now. A sound outside the wagon, a metallic clink. She tensed, every muscle screaming defiance despite her weakness. Was he here? Had he found her already? She pushed herself up, ignoring the surge of agony, and peered through a gap in the canvas flap. A man, tall, broad-shouldered, silhouetted against the pale morning light. He was tending a small fire, his movements calm, efficient. Not the man she feared. Not the voice that haunted her nightmares. This man was a stranger. He had found them. A fresh wave of fear washed over her. What would he do? Throw them out? Report her? He turned then, as if sensing her gaze, and looked directly at the wagon. His eyes, in the morning light, were a clear, unreadable gray. He didn't speak, didn't threaten. He simply looked. Then, he picked up a tin cup from beside the fire and walked towards the wagon, stopping a few feet away. "Got coffee," he said, his voice low, gravelly, utterly devoid of emotion. He didn't offer to help her out, didn't pry, just stood there holding the cup. She hesitated, wrapped protectively around the still sleeping babies. Hunger gnawed at her, a dull ache that had been her constant companion for days. Thirst parched her throat, but fear held her frozen. "Who are you?" she managed, her voice a dry rasp. "Silas," he replied. He didn't offer a name in return, didn't ask why she was there. The silence stretched, broken only by the wind and the crackle of the fire. Slowly, she reached out a trembling hand towards the cup. He stepped closer and placed it in her grasp, his fingers not quite touching hers. The tin was warm. She drank, the bitter liquid a shock to her system, then a soothing warmth. It gave her a little strength. "Thank you," she whispered. He nodded, a curt dip of his head. "Need to move. Can't stay here." "I know," she said. He might follow. The words were difficult, laced with the dread that was always present. Silas's gaze flickered over her bruised face. "He did that." She looked away, shame burning hotter than the bruises. "Yes." He was silent for another long moment. She expected questions, demands for explanation. But he asked none. Instead, he simply said, "Sun's coming up. Need to be miles from here before noon." He turned and walked back towards the fire, leaving her with the coffee and the silent weight of his presence. He didn't offer help with the babies, didn't intrude on the fragile space she occupied. He offered simple fact and quiet action. It wasn't kindness, not overtly. It was acceptance. A strange, unlooked-for acceptance that allowed her a moment to breathe, to steel herself, to face the impossible task of gathering her strength and her 3 children to face whatever came next, side by side with this silent stranger. The sun climbed higher, painting the sky in harsh yellows and whites. The wind picked up, whipping dust around them as Silas hitched the horses. Inside the wagon, she, Clara, had managed to feed the babies, coaxing them to nurse despite her own weakness and the awkward confines. She tried to arrange them more securely, cushioning them as best she could with spare blankets. Her body ached with every movement, but the desperate need to protect her children lent her a brittle strength. She listened to Silas's movements outside, the creak of leather, the soft murmur he used with the horses, the rhythmic thud of his boots. There was a competence about him, a quiet capability that she found herself clinging to, a lifeline in the vast emptiness of her despair. He climbed back into the driver's seat, the wagon groaning under his weight. He didn't look back at her, just took up the reins. "Hold on tight," he said, and the wagon lurched forward. The journey was a brutal test of endurance. Every bump sent a jolt of pain through Clara's body, forcing her to bite back cries. The babies fussed, unaccustomed to the motion and the lack of comfort. She soothed them as best she could, her low hum lost in the rattle of the wagon and the endless sigh of the wind. Silas drove relentlessly, his eyes scanning the horizon, rarely speaking. When he did, it was only practical, stopping for water, or going over rough ground. He offered her water, a piece of dry biscuit, pushing them back towards her without looking. It was the bare minimum survival. Yet it was more than anyone had offered her in a long time. Hours bled into one another. The sun beat down, then began its slow descent. They stopped as twilight gathered, a place by a rocky overhang that offered a meager windbreak. Silas built another small fire, fetched water from a hidden spring he seemed to know existed. He cooked a little salt pork, offering her a share without comment. She ate slowly, savoring the warmth, the simple sustenance. As darkness fell, she saw him sitting by the fire, silhouetted against the flames, his rifle across his lap. He didn't sleep, not properly. He watched, always watching. For the first time since fleeing, a fragile sense of security began to bloom in her chest. It wasn't safety, not yet, but it was a reprieve. She managed to ask his name earlier. Silas. He hadn't offered more, and she hadn't pressed. Her own story remained locked away, too heavy with shame and fear to articulate. He hadn't asked. It was a silent agreement, a temporary truce with reality, built on shared need and unspoken understanding. He needed to drive, to watch. She needed to survive, to care for the babies. Their purposes aligned, for now. She drifted into a fitful sleep, the sounds of the night punctuated by the cries of a baby and Silas's quiet movements as he tended the fire or checked on the horses. She woke just before dawn, stiff and sore, the babies stirring. Silas was gone from the fire, but she heard him nearby. Then, a sound that froze the blood in her veins. Not the wind, not the horses. Hoofbeats, coming fast, and a voice, bellowing her name across the empty land. A voice that promised retribution, pain, and absolute control. It was him, Jeremiah. He had found them. Clara scrambled, heart pounding, pulling the babies closer, her eyes wide with terror. Silas appeared by the wagon, his face grim. There was no stoicism now, only a hard readiness. The temporary truce with reality was shattered. The storm she had fled had finally caught up. Jeremiah rode up fast, 2 other men trailing him. He was a big man, loud, his face contorted with rage. He pulled his horse to a skidding halt a few yards from the wagon, his eyes sharp and cruel, fixing instantly on Clara huddled inside. "Clara, you stupid cow. Thought you could run, did you?" His voice cracked like a whip. "Get out here, and bring my brats." Clara whimpered, pressing herself further into the wagon. The babies, sensing her fear, began to cry, thin, reedy sounds that only seemed to fuel Jeremiah's fury. Silas stepped forward, putting himself between the wagon and the riders. He held no weapon visibly, his hands loose at his sides, but the stillness about him was more threatening than any drawn gun. "She's not going anywhere," Silas said, his voice quiet, but carrying an authority that cut through Jeremiah's bluster. Jeremiah laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "And who in God's name are you? Some saddle tramp thinks he can protect my property?" He spat the word property, like it was dirt. "That's my woman and my children. Get out of my way, or I'll ride you down." "They ain't your property," Silas said, his gaze steady. "And she ain't yours to hit." Jeremiah's face darkened. "You saw that, did you? Little busybody. Ain't you? Maybe you need a lesson in minding your own business." He motioned to his men. They started to fan out, circling slightly. Inside the wagon, Clara's mind raced. There was nowhere to run. 3 babies, her injured body. This was it. Jeremiah would take her back. And it would be worse this time. So much worse. A flicker of defiance ignited in the pit of her stomach, fueled by the baby's cries and Silas's unexpected stand. She wouldn't go back. Not alive. Not with her children. Silas didn't move. He watched Jeremiah and his men with eyes that seemed to miss nothing. "There's 3 of you," Silas stated, simply stating a fact. "But only 1 wagon. Not much room for passengers if you want to take them back easy." Jeremiah sneered. "Easy? Who says I want easy? I'll tie her behind my horse if I have to." "And the kids," he shrugged, a gesture of chilling indifference. "They'll learn their place." Silas's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes hardened. "You touch that wagon, or the people in it, and you won't be riding anywhere." Jeremiah roared with laughter. "You got a gun, old man?" Slowly, deliberately, Silas reached inside his coat. Not for a pistol. He pulled out a large, heavy wrench used for wagon repairs. "Got this," he said. "And I know how to use it." It wasn't a gun. But in his hand, with the quiet intent in his posture, It looked deadly. Jeremiah hesitated for just a fraction of a second. Silas's calm resistance wasn't what he expected. He was used to fear, to people cowering. But rage quickly overcame his brief uncertainty. "You think you can stop me with that?" Charging. His men spurred their horses forward. Silas moved then, not towards them, but slightly to the side, drawing them towards him, away from the wagon. Clara watched, heart in her throat, expecting him to be overwhelmed. But Silas was deceptively quick. The first man reached him, swinging a rifle butt. Silas deflected the blow with the wrench, then with a swift, brutal movement, struck the man's arm. A sickening crack echoed across the plain. The man screamed, dropping the rifle, clutching his broken limb. The second man pulled a pistol. Silas didn't hesitate. He ducked low, the shot whistling over his head, and surged forward, driving the wrench up into the horse's belly. The animal reared, screaming, throwing its rider. Jeremiah, enraged, drew his own pistol. "I'll kill you myself," he roared, aiming at Silas. But before he could fire, Clara, driven by a surge of desperate courage, grabbed the coffee pot Silas had left cooling by the fire and threw it with all her might at Jeremiah's horse. It was a futile gesture, born of pure desperation, but the clatter and unexpected movement startled the horse just as Jeremiah fired. The shot went wild, kicking up dust near Silas. Silas didn't waste the opportunity. He lunged towards Jeremiah's horse, not at the man, but at the animal's legs, swinging the wrench low. The horse whinnied in panic, bucking violently. Jeremiah, caught off guard, fought to control the panicked animal. Silas pressed his advantage, closing the distance, forcing the horse to continue its chaotic dance. The injured man was still screaming, clutching his arm. The dismounted man was scrambling for his fallen pistol. Jeremiah was locked in a battle with his horse, unable to get a clear shot at Silas. It was chaos, brief and brutal, fueled by desperation and unexpected resistance. Silas, the quiet man of routine, fought with a ferocity Clara hadn't imagined. He wasn't just defending them. He was fighting to end this, to drive the threat away decisively. He landed another blow with the wrench, not on Jeremiah, but on the horse's flank, urging its panic. The horse bolted, throwing Jeremiah clear onto the hard ground. He lay stunned for a moment. Silas didn't go for him. He stood his ground, the wrench held ready, his eyes cold and hard. Jeremiah's men, seeing their leader downed and one of their own incapacitated, hesitated. The wind picked up again, swirling dust around the scene of the aborted confrontation. "Get him," Silas said, his voice low but carrying unmistakable finality. "Take him and go. And don't ever come back." The dismounted man, limping, helped the injured one onto his horse. They looked at Silas, then at the prone Jeremiah, then back at Silas. The quiet competence they'd dismissed earlier now felt like deadly capability. Without another word, they hauled the groaning Jeremiah onto the back of one of the horses and turned, riding away quickly, swallowed by the vast, indifferent landscape as fast as they had appeared. Silence fell again, broken only by the wind and the whimpering of the babies. Clara slowly lowered herself back into the wagon, trembling, the thrown coffee pot lying uselessly nearby. It was over. He was gone. Silas walked back to the wagon, his chest rising and falling heavily, but his face once more settling into its usual stoic lines. He didn't look at her directly. He just stood there for a moment, scanning the horizon one last time, confirming they were truly gone. Then he turned and looked at the wagon, at Clara, at the babies. The hard edge softened slightly. "They won't be back soon," he said. "Not after that." Clara nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. Tears, hot and silent, traced paths through the dust on her cheeks. She had survived. The babies were safe. And this stranger, this quiet, capable man, had made it possible. He didn't offer comfort, didn't ask if she was all right. He simply picked up the fallen coffee pot, dusted it off, and placed it back near the now dying fire. Then he walked over to his horses, checking them over. Practicalities. Always practicalities. Clara watched him, the fear slowly ebbing, replaced by an overwhelming wave of gratitude and a dawning sense of possibility. She had fled one life, one source of pain and control, and stumbled into this unpredictable space with a man who, despite his solitude, had chosen to stand against a threat he had no obligation to face. Life was a relentless journey across harsh terrain, filled with unexpected storms and dangers. But sometimes, in the most unlikely places, you found a small, steady light. A quiet strength that didn't demand anything in return, but simply was. Silas had shown her that strength, not through grand pronouncements, but through action, through putting himself between her and the man who sought to break her. Her transformation wasn't complete, not yet. The scars remained, inside and out, but the vulnerability that had defined her for so long was beginning to recede, replaced by a quiet resilience, a fierce determination to not only survive, but to build something new for her children. She looked at the babies, sleeping now, their tiny faces innocent of the violence that had just swirled around them. She had gotten them this far. With Silas, perhaps she could get them further. The future wasn't clear, wasn't easy, but for the first time in a long time it felt possible. She took a deep, shaky breath, the air tasting of dust and freedom. The journey continued, uncertain but no longer hopeless.